One of the most important economic concepts that have come to the forefront during this crisis is the concept of externalities. Just type in externalities and COVID-19 on a Google search, and the search will come up with more than 650,000 links. So, what actually does this term mean, and how does it actually relate to COVID-19? These are the questions that we'll answer today in this presentation. With this concept in mind, I will also make a case to why we should all be wearing face masks or face coverings in these times when we are in the vicinity of others. So welcome to the first of hopefully many videos on a topic in microeconomics. The topic that we will cover today is relevant for those studying A-level economics, foundation level economics, IB economics, AP microeconomics, or even for first-year undergraduate students. This lesson will be divided into two parts, the first part being a more qualitative analysis of this concept, and in the second part, we will cover the diagrams required for this topic and also look at some evaluation points. If you haven't checked it out yet, I've created a few videos that have covered macroeconomic policies. The link for the entire playlist is in the description below. In the two-part lesson today, we will systematically approach this topic through a very typical learning structure. First, we will get our knowledge in by defining the concepts of externalities. And then we will start applying these concepts to various examples, bringing in as many examples as possible from the different products that have gained attention during the COVID-19 crisis. Then, we'll analyze the market for face masks specifically. We'll do a more qualitative analysis in this first part, and then continue on with a more diagrammatic analysis in the second part. In addition, in the second part, I will also introduce another example to look at positive externalities as well, and we'll cover both positive and negative externalities with the help of diagrams, and then finally evaluating this concept. Spending some time criticizing this concept, which may be useful when answering longer questions on this topic. And obviously ending this lesson by making a clear case for why wearing face masks in public areas are important. Externalities can be defined as the costs and benefits of an economic transaction to the third party. The third party in this case is not the consumer or the producer of the product, or in fact anyone who is directly involved in the production or consumption process. For example, the consumption of plastic by humans have led to negative effects on animals such as the one shown here. With a third party are marine animals like the turtle who are negatively affected by our consumption of plastic products. This is a clear example of a negative externality. However, do note that there could be a positive effect of an economic transaction to the third party as well. Externalities could also be positive and beneficial to those not involved. For example, by wearing a mask in public areas, you don't only reduce the risk of being infected by the virus yourself, but you also reduce the chance of others being infected. This positive effect to others is called positive externalities. So, to summarize what we've learned so far, we know now that externalities are the effects on the third party. If there are negative effects caused to the third party, this is known as negative externalities. If the effect experienced by third party is a positive one, in other words, it brings benefits to the third party, then this is known as a positive externality. There is one more layer of analysis, and depending on which exam board you are studying for, some exam boards really want you to distinguish between where the positive or negative effect comes from in your analysis. This means that you will have to distinguish whether the negative externality comes from the production process or the consumption process, and whether the positive externalities comes from the production process or the consumption process. Going back to the plastic example from the previous slide, the negative effect of our usage of plastic to marine life would be an example of a negative externality from consumption, as we are technically consumers of plastic. And the example of wearing masks in public to reduce the risk of transmitting the disease to others, this would be an example of a positive externality from a consumption, as a person using a mask is a consumer of masks. However, there is also negative externalities from production. In fact, this is the most commonly cited example of negative externalities, pollution from factories, for example. which will be producing different industrial goods and polluting the environment at the same time. And there is also positive externalities from production, which are less commonly cited. But for example, some cite the production of certain technology that was originally for one industry, let's say the defense industry, which has spillover effects to the healthcare industry. It just reminds me of a scene in the latest Netflix series, Space Force, where the chief scientific advisor of Space Force, when asked to justify funding to the Space Force, which was actually created for defense purposes, is also leading research that could help detect natural disasters in advance, which could help various communities globally. We will look at this a little bit more in the second part of this two-part lesson. You should now know what externalities are, and also be able to come up with some examples. So now what? Why are we actually learning about this? And how does this actually relate to your overall study of economics? One of the things that you need to keep in mind to be able to analyze this concept further is the context that we are discussing this concept in. So let's go all the way back to the start of your economics course, where you're introduced to the basic economic problem. The main reason why we are actually here studying economics. Do you remember what this was? If you answered scarcity, you are right. The study of economics is to figure out the best way to allocate our scarce resources to meet our unlimited wants. Therefore, one of the methods to deal with this problem of scarcity, to help us make choices, in fact, is the market mechanism. In other words, the market mechanism, through the interaction of demand and supply, should enable us to allocate our scarce resources in the most efficient manner. In fact, as seen in the quote by Adam Smith, due to the invisible hand, even where people act on their own self-interest, they will be advancing the interests of society, distributing resources in the most efficient way for the entire society. However, will this sort of efficiency be able to be achieved in every single market that we have in the economy? I doubt it. We would already be living in a utopia if this was true, and we didn't need to waste all these times trying to discuss and debate various economic issues. The market mechanisms sometimes fail, more so in certain markets than others, and this is what we call market failure. When the market mechanism fails to allocate resources efficiently, or when the market mechanism leads to an inefficient allocation of resources. And you've guessed it, one of the reasons why markets fail is due to the existence of externalities. Therefore, we can say that due to the existence of externalities, the market mechanism will lead to an inefficient allocation of resources. The reason why this inefficiency occurs is because in the market system, consumers and producers are assumed to act, and in fact do actually act, only in their own interests. Acting in their own interest means that consumers and producers only think about their own costs and benefits, or what we call private costs and benefits, which is represented by the market level of consumption and production. While this may work in certain markets, there are markets where the impact on the third party is very significant, but it is ignored by the consumers and producers in that market. This impact on the third party could be positive or negative. And due to the impact being ignored, it leads to certain goods and services not being produced and consumed at the most efficient level. In other words, the market level of output does not equal to the socially optimum level of output. With the logical analysis developed in the previous slide, let's now apply it to an example. I will start our qualitative analysis by looking at the market for face masks. And first, I'm going to state here that in the market for face masks, there are positive externalities from the consumption of this product. Therefore, based on this claim, in a free market economy, the outcome is that there will not be enough face masks being consumed by the people, and there will be an underconsumption of face masks in the free market economy, which means that there are not enough of our scarce resources are allocated into this industry. Why is this the case? According to this line of analysis, the reason is because in a free market economy, all consumers who are self-interested only think about their private costs and benefits. This means that when a rational consumer is thinking about wearing masks, thoughts of private costs such as, it will be difficult for me to breathe when wearing a mask, my freedom of choice is reduced. And also private benefits such as the chances of me being infected by COVID-19 will be reduced. Keep in mind that everything is about me, because this is what self-interest actually means. Consumers of face masks ignore the possible impacts, in this case, the positive impacts on others if one is wearing a face mask. In other words, what is ignored by the free market is the external benefits of wearing face masks, such as the reduction in risk of infecting others. For example, in the infographic by the Community Medical Center of Central California, to show the benefits of masks, the first scenario outlined shows that a COVID-19 carrier without a mask has a high risk of transmitting the virus to a healthy person without a mask. In the second scenario, a COVID-19 carrier without a mask may have a moderate risk of transmitting the virus to a healthy person with a mask. In the third, a COVID-19 carrier with a mask will have a low risk of transmitting the virus to the healthy person without a mask. The fourth scenario is the best outcome, where if both the COVID-19 carrier is wearing a mask and a healthy person is wearing a mask, the transmission risk will be extremely low. So what this means is that if a person is a COVID-19 carrier, who, keep in mind, for this virus may be asymptomatic, when the virus carrier do not wear a mask, that person may be infecting others, but the virus carrier may not be thinking of this, as they are self-interested, only thinking about the costs and benefits to themselves, not others. This is even more prevalent amongst the young. Think about the spring breakers in Florida, as they may either be unknowingly asymptomatic, or even if they are symptomatic, they may think that the cost to themselves of this virus may not be that great. Therefore, they continue life as normal without a face mask, as the cost of wearing a face mask to themselves may be higher than the benefits to themselves. What they are not thinking about is the external costs, the higher risk of others getting the virus, and possibly that others will suffer more than them if they actually catch the virus. Therefore, the outcome is that the market as a whole is not consuming enough face masks. In other words, the market level of output is lower than the optimum level of output. The optimum level of output being the level of consumption of face masks which would benefit the entire society. So, going back to the original line of causation, if there is a failure in the market, what can we do to solve it? How can we get more people to stop being so self-interested and start taking into consideration the external benefits of wearing face masks in this case? The solution that economics textbooks will offer is pretty simple: government intervention. For example, government regulation. In fact, this is what many governments are doing nowadays with regards to face masks, making it compulsory to wear them, especially in public areas where social distancing may be more difficult. For example, the governments of the UK, Northern Ireland, Scotland, Switzerland, Germany, Texas, and many others have made it or are going to make it compulsory to wear face masks in public transport, and some even in shops. Hopefully this flowchart will ensure that you will fully understand the causal links that you need to master for your economics course. We'll cover the diagrammatic analysis in the next part. However, for those not joining us in the next part, please do wear your mask, especially in public areas, not just for your benefit, but for the benefit of others as well. Even if your country have managed to suppress the transmission of the virus, the fight against the virus is not over, and the least that you could do is wear a mask. See you later.